Path of Exile 2 may not be as hard to grasp as the first game, but it still has a lot of mistakes that you can do along the way, especially since its main campaign already puts you through the grinder. So ladies and gents, today we're going through some of the biggest mistakes as well as tips that you should probably know, especially if you're just starting out, but even if you have already played for a few hours or a couple of days, these should also help you in your journey. Coming up to number 1, you should probably know that weapons now have innate abilities, and even within the same weapon category, you might find up to 3 different innate abilities. So just to give you an example, I have 3 scepter versions right here. One that provides discipline, which is a party buff, another one that summons 2 skeletal minions, and another one that provides malice that's going to debuff enemies around us. So a lot of you guys actually asked me on Steam, where the hell did my skeletal minions gone to? I had 2 of them and now they are missing. It's because you no longer have the scepter that gives you the 2 skeletal minions. You can actually see all of these innate abilities at the top of the skill menu right here. And the best part is that they also take support gems, so you can go ahead and buff those skills. They also don't cost anything most of the times. For example, the 2 skeletal warriors that you summon do not have a spirit cost, but in the case of the discipline, it will have a spirit cost if you apply any aura effect to it. And third of all, and most important, a lot of them can actually stack with their regular gem counterparts. So for example, you can totally stack the skeletal warriors, the 2 ones you get from the scepter, with the ones from the gem variant to have +2 of however many you can summon. So if you can summon like 5, you're going to have 7 with that extra, scepter on top. That's why at number 2, I want to mention a few important things about skills. As you probably noticed, compared to the first PoE game, you no longer apply these to your gear. Instead, there's a separate skills menu that holds everything, including the support gems. So one of the things I recommend doing is to pretty much interact with anything, even with the most unlikely of places. Even those still have a chance to give you some uncut gems or uncut support gems. And you really want those in the first couple of chapters, as they aren't as abundant as they used to be in the first Path of Exile game. So you no longer get to buy an abundance of them from vendors in main hubs. Instead, you're going to find their uncut version. So when you find them, you kind of have 2 options for the main skill gems, either to go ahead and level an existing one to the current max level of the uncut gem that you just got. So if it's 7, it's going to upgrade that skill to 7 if it isn't already. But in the case of engraving it, this is what's going to unlock a new skill gem. And this is what brings us to tip number 3. I'm gonna go ahead and just cover the support gems for a little bit, the ones that actually modify how your primary skills actually behave, the ones that you slot in next to them adjacently. So whenever you unlock a support skill gem, you're not just going to want to have the recommended ones shown to you by the game. By default, it shows you up to like 9 of them. So that's because you may actually miss upon some very strong build potentials. So in this case, I recommend you to go ahead and declick the show recommended gems here and actually check out all the possible support gems that may work with that skill right here. So just to give you an example, my summon Infernal Hound, definitely doesn't show anything like, for example, the Martial Tempo support gem over here. It only shows it if I declick the show recommended gems. And that is actually a very strong ability that makes my Hound actually attack 25% faster. At number 4, let's talk about gaining more power early, and I definitely recommend not holding back too much on orbs of transmutation and orbs of augmentation. They are very common and you should upgrade your gear relatively often, even in Act 1, especially as you find higher and higher eye level items, even of normal quality. I recommend at least gambling an orb of transmutation. Maybe you get a good magic item out of it with a stat that's immediately useful, and if it is, you can go ahead and use an orb of augmentation to add a second affix. And in Act 1, that's all you need. From that point on, you can either gamble your way at vendors or try out boss runs. I'm going to talk about those in just a little bit, but if you go ahead in towns, every now and then when you level up, you're going to see that they refresh all of their stashes, even every few minutes, and when relogging, they actually do that. So I recommend paying attention to them often because you might find something that's really good. Maybe sometimes something that's even of rare quality, which yes, may be expensive, but may give you such a huge boost, especially if we're talking about weapons. In fact, I definitely recommend visiting these vendors often, especially the gamble one. Every now and then I recommend at least buying the weapon, the random weapon for it. Even if it costs a little bit over there, you might have a chance for this to actually turn rare once you place it in your inventory. So that could actually become build defining, even game changing from very early on. And it doesn't really cost that much gold, at least for the first couple of chapters. That gold cost is manageable and you're going to more than make up that gold as you progress further into Act 3. But that means you clear it much faster, so you do recoup some of that cost back. Now, if you don't want to spend any of that, you can definitely use those regal orbs, but the next tip that I have is that for all of the magic and rare items that do not have any sockets on them, I recommend to always disenchant them. So you can still sell them if you are really short on gold, but I recommend going ahead and disenchanting them. That's because it's going to give you all of those upgrade currencies that you need, and especially for regal orbs, I definitely encourage you to do that always for the rare items you never get to use. The only exception to that rule is when you find items with sockets on them. So unless you're planning to actually use those items, what I recommend doing is to not disenchant them, do not sell them under any circumstance. Just go ahead and salvage them at the salvage bench. This unlocks relatively early into Act 1, but this is going to give you something called Artificer's Shard, and every 10 of those you're going to transform them into Artificer's Orb, and you're going to use those orbs to apply a new socket to your gear or weapon piece. And this is going to be very helpful because starting in Act 1, but especially once you reach Act 2 and 3, you're going to see a ramp up of all of these runes dropping for you. And a lot of them have very strong bonuses. If you apply them to weapon, usually it's going to apply some mana or even health leech or some kind of status effect. If you apply it on the armor, on the other hand, it can give you a bunch of defensive stats like extra HP, extra resistances, even extra mana, and you can have up to 2 of them on the chest piece and up to 2 on the two-handed weapons. Meanwhile, all the one-handed weapons and the remaining item pieces get up to 1 of these sockets. So that means a lot of extra stats that you can further apply to get more survivability or even improve other parts of your build that you really need. Also, on a similar note, if you're going to go ahead and sell items, what I recommend is to first identify them. That's going to at least add another 100 gold in terms of sell value, sometimes even double the value of them items compared to how it is not having them identified. And by the way, you can identify items for free at this guy right here in every single map. So he pretty much follows you in the main story, the hooded one, and he's going to just identify your entire inventory of items in one single click without consuming anything. This brings us to tip number 6, or was it 7? Can't really remember, but the next one is that you can reset maps, and this is going to help a ton if you want to refarm a particular boss, get more chances at better loot, skill gems, or maybe even farm some gold. You can easily do so by clicking on any waypoint, which is going to open up the main map menu. From this point on, hover over the map you want to reset and then press Ctrl plus left click. This will open the instance menu so you can see your current instance, which resets every like almost 15 minutes, but you can also create a completely new one which refreshes all the enemies, the bosses, and the events inside, so you can farm them over and over again. In this case, I recommend the Freythorn. You're going to encounter the King in the Mist here, and on your first try it gives you plus 30 to Spirit, plus your very first uncut Spirit gem. So this is going to give you one of those permanent buffs that you can apply. Plus, it's also part of one of the strongest builds early for the Minion Witch build. So more on that in the previous video if you want to check that build guide out. But if you reset that map, you can redo all the rituals again, defeat all the enemies, and at the end of it, defeat the boss again, have the boss drops, plus of course the tributes, add the tribute in the middle, which gives you another chance for a couple of extra items. So very easy to farm some better items in case you're really missing them. Moving on to number 8, one thing I actually made a huge mistake with was not unlocking my Ascendency as soon as I reached Act 2, like second half of it. Basically, you can unlock it very easily through a very easy trial of Sekhmet as soon as you hit this map right here in Act 2. So it's going to be towards the end. You're going to go to this place called the Trader's Passage, and during that, or even later if you missed it, I recommend scouring the whole dungeon until you find this sort of entry where there is a boss fight in the Forgotten Prison of the Traitor. Once you defeat that boss fight, you're going to get a special coin from it. And once you got that special coin, you can go back at the caravan, interact with the NPCs over here, and then go to the desert map. This is now going to open up a completely new destination to the Trial of the Secamus, which is going to be that first trial. And the trial here is very easy on your first completion. I recommend going with all of the options that give you extra keys for the chests at the end. I'm going to make a bigger guide in a different video for like the full version of this, because you can definitely mess things out. But at the end of it, you're going to have a pretty easy boss fight, and once you're done with that, you're going to unlock one of your first two Ascendency. So you cannot switch these up at the current time. Whichever of these you pick on the current character, you cannot backtrack. You have to create a completely new character if you want to pick the other Ascendency. So in this case, you're going to unlock whichever you want. I got the Infernalist plus 2 points that you can go ahead and immediately invest. This may immediately just improve your damage, your build up, and give you a lot of other opportunities to like just be better at map clearing. It is definitely worth it. Now at number 9, I should have talked about this earlier, but positioning is very important in this game because you cannot phase dodge through targets. If they pin you in a corner or in a tight spot, you don't have any escape. You're pretty much getting gangbanged right there on the spot, and you can't do anything unless you take them down quick enough, which oftentimes you cannot. So what I recommend doing, especially as a spellcaster, is to try to bring them into open areas, flank them, circle around them, and just keep your distance as you use your attacks. And if you're getting caught in a tight corridor and enemies come from both sides, you're pretty much doing it wrong. So in this case, I would recommend using those as choke points, stay at the entrance, take them down, and only when the path is clear, move further. And at the same time, I also have some stuff to say about dodges. In the case of dodges, this is pretty much like Path of Exile meets Elden Ring. You're going to want to learn those enemy attack patterns, especially for the bosses. But I do have some indications. One of them against bosses with multiple melee swings that are hard to dodge. One of the biggest tips I have over here is to dodge to either side of the boss's body. Not inside of the enemy attack, but to flank its sides. So in this case, to give you an example, this boss right here was doing a 4 series of attacks. So if I were to dodge away from these attacks, eventually it would hit me with at least 1 or 2 because they were just much faster than my dodges. But if I dodged to the sides of it, so to the flank of the boss's body, I could go behind it. Meanwhile, the enemy's animation would just continue to the opposite side as it usually does. So running away sometimes can be a trap, but not always. In the case of huge arena AoEs, staying at the very edge of it can help a ton, especially in the case of spells. Oftentimes you may find a corner that, even if it shows the animation appearing physically on or under your character, usually it doesn't deal any damage to your HP. This happened very often, but you have to know how to time it right. Moving on to the next tip for some extra power-ups in terms of extra skill points, maybe even extra stats, I recommend going ahead and completing any extra objective or encounter you might find around the main campaign map. You're going to notice that by these gray skulls appearing next or adjacent to the areas you're going into. And these gray skulls usually indicate some kind of boss fight, and oftentimes you may get some item from it that gives you a permanent stat boost. Either a permanent increase in spirit or maybe other attributes like various resistances, but some of them can even give you extra skill points that you can go ahead and use. So this can be very helpful as you're trying to maybe gain some extra passives in there, become stronger, or even invest into some very strong nodes that may be build defining early on. So I recommend going ahead and just complete as many of them as possible. Not all of them will give you those permanent rewards, but most of them will be worth it nonetheless. By the way, quick tip that I have for weapons over here: if you want to have a bit more extra carry capacity, you have a secondary weapon set as well, and you can use that even if you don't actually use it in combat. You can use that as inventory items, so you can go ahead and place 2 weapons or 1 weapon and 1 shield in that secondary weapon slot. So that's 2 extra items, which can be up to like, I don't know, even like 10 extra item slots. That can be very helpful if you're in a clutch, don't want to teleport just yet, but still want to get the extra loot from the ground. You might want to plan out your build planner, because it's going to be very expensive to change your skills up to like 1000 gold, which is not really too far into the game, but it's extremely costly. You're not going to afford yeah, resetting the entire tree, unfortunately. So I recommend first planning it properly and then pressing the accept button once you have actually dedicated those skill points. Another alternative could be, if you don't use secondary weapon sets, is to use a secondary weapon set, test out if you like those skills, those passives actually, and if you don't like them, you can apply them differently in your primary weapon set, because each weapon set can have different passives distributed in the skill tree. Try it out, see if you want to. Again, I don't really recommend it, but it's like, if you don't have any other way, that can be your last resort of sorts. And yeah, that's pretty much it with the best tips, big mistakes early on and whatnot. Let me know down below if you have any more. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.